The 24th word. This word consists of 5 branches. Study the 4th branch carefully, and hold on to the 5th branch and climb it, then pluck its fruits.
Bismillahirrahmanirrahim. Allahu la ilaha illa huwa lahul asma'ul husna.
In the name of Allah, the Merciful, the Compassionate. Allah, there is no God but He. His are the most beautiful names. We shall indicate 5 branches of one of the many truths from the luminous tree of this glorious verse. First branch. A sultan has different titles in the spheres of his government, and different styles and attributes among the classes of his subjects, and different names and signs in the levels of his rule. For example, just judge in the judiciary, sultan in the civil service, commander-in-chief in the army, and caliph in the learned establishment. If making an analogy with these, you know the rest of his names and titles, you will understand that a single sultan may possess 1,000 names and titles in the spheres of his rule and levels of government. It is as if, through his corporate personality and telephone, the ruler is present and knowing in every sphere, and through his laws and regulations and representatives, sees and is seen, and behind the veil in every degree, disposes and sees, governs and observes, through his decree, knowledge and power. It is exactly the same for the sustainer of all the worlds, who is the ruler of pre-eternity and post-eternity. In the degrees of his dominicality, he has attributes and designations which are all different, but which look to each other. And in the spheres of his Godhead, he has names and marks which are all different, but which are one within the other. And in his magnificent activities, he has representations and appellations which are all different, but which resemble each other. And in the disposals of his power, he has titles which are all different, but which hint of one another. And in the manifestations of his attributes, he has sacred appearances which are all different, but which show one another. And in the displays of his acts, he has wise disposals which are of numerous sorts, but which complete one another. And in his multicoloured art and varieties of creatures, he has splendid aspects of dominicality, which are all different, but which look to one another. And together with this, in every world, in every realm of beings, the title of one of the most beautiful names is manifested. In each sphere, one name is dominant, and the other names are subordinate to it. Rather, they are there on account of it. Furthermore, in every level of beings, many or few, great or small, particular or general, he has an appearance through a particular manifestation, a particular dominicality, a particular name. That is to say, although the name in question is general and encompasses everything, it is turned towards a thing with such intention and importance that it is as if it is special to that thing alone. Moreover, although the all-glorious Creator is close to everything, there are almost 70,000 luminous veils obscuring him. You can compare how many veils there are from the particular degree of creativity of the name of Creator, which is manifested on you to the greatest degree, and supreme title, which is Creator of all the universe. That means, on condition you leave the whole universe behind you, from the door of creativity, you may reach the limits of the name of Creator and draw close to the sphere of attributes. The veils have windows which look to one another, and the names appear one within the other, and the acts look to one another, and the similitudes enter one within the other. and the titles hint of one another, and the manifestations resemble each other, and the disposals assist and complete one another, and the various dispositions of dominicality help and assist one another. It surely, therefore, necessitates not denying the other titles, acts and degrees of dominicality when Almighty Allah is known through one of His names, titles or degrees of dominicality. Indeed, it is harmful if a transition is not made from the manifestation of any one name to the others. For example, if the works of the names of All-Powerful and Creator are seen, and not the name of All-Knowing, a person may fall into heedlessness and the misguidance of nature. He should always keep in view and recite He, and He is Allah. He should listen and hear from everything. Say, He is Allah, the One. His tongue should utter and proclaim. All the world declares, there is no God but He. Thus, through the decree of Allah, there is no God but He. His are the most beautiful names. The Qur'an points to these truths we have mentioned. If you want to observe these elevated truths from anear, go and ask a stormy sea or the quaking earth, what are you saying? You will hear that they are saying, O glorious one, O glorious one, O one of might, all compelling. Then ask the small animals and their young, being raised with kindness and compassion in the sea and on the land. What are you saying? They will surely reply, O beauteous one, O beauteous one, O most compassionate and merciful one. Footnote. Even one day I looked at the cats. All they were doing was eating, playing and sleeping. I wondered, how is it that these little monsters, which perform no duties, are known as blessed? Later, I lay down to sleep for the night. I looked. One of the cats had come. It lay against my pillow and put its mouth against my ear and murmuring, O most compassionate one, O most compassionate one, in the most clear manner, as though refuted in the name of its species the objection and insult which had occurred to me, throwing it in my face. Then this occurred to me, I wonder if this recitation is particular to this cat, or is it general among cats? And is it only an unfair objector like me who hears it? Or if anyone listens carefully, can they hear it? The next morning I listened to the other cats. It was not so clearly, but to varying degrees they were repeating the same invocation. At first, O most compassionate was discernible following their purring. Then gradually their purrings and meowings became, O most merciful. It became an unarticulated, eloquent and sorrowful recitation. They would close their mouths and utter a fine, O most compassionate. I related the story to the brothers who visited me, and they listened carefully as well, and said they heard it to an extent. Later, I wondered what this name's special feature was, and why they recited in the way of men and not in animal tongue. Then it imparted to my heart that since these animals are very delicate and petted like children, and are a friend of man, they are in much need of kindness and compassionate. When they are stroked and paid attention to in the way they like, as praise and thanks for the bounty, and unlike dogs, they proclaim the mercy of their all-compassionate Creator in their own worlds. They warn men in the sleep of heedlessness, and through their cry of, O most compassionate, they remind those who worship causes who it is that help comes from, and from whom mercy may be awaited. Then listen to the skies. They say, O glorious one of beauty. And give your ear to the earth. It says, O beauteous one of glory. Listen carefully to the animals. They are saying, O most merciful one, O provider. And ask the spring. You will hear many names like O gentle one, O most merciful one, O most compassionate one, O most generous one, O gracious one, O benevolent one, O giver of forms, O giver of light, O bestower, O adorner. Then ask a human being who is a true human being, and see how he recites all the most beautiful names, and how they are written on his forehead. If you look carefully, you too may read them. It is as if the universe is a huge orchestra celebrating the divine names, mixing the faintest song with the most powerful refrains. It produces a sublime and subtle harmony. You may make further analogies in the same way. For sure, man is the place of manifestation of all the names. But the names being various has resulted in the universe's variety and the differences in the angels' worship, and has also caused a degree of variety among men. The different laws of the prophets, the different ways of the saints, and the different paths of the purified scholars has arisen from this mystery. For example, together with the other names, the name of All-Powerful was predominant in Jesus, peace be upon him, and in those who follow the path of love, the name of Loving One prevails, and in those who follow the path of contemplation and reflection, the name of All-Wise. Thus, if someone is both a teacher and a policeman and a clerk of the court and an inspector in the civil service, in each office he has both relations and duties and obligations and salaries and responsibilities and promotion and enemies and rivals who are the cause of his failures. He appears before the king with many titles, and he sees the king. He seeks help from him with many tongues. He has recourse to many of the ruler's titles, and seeks his help in many forms in order to be saved from the evil of his enemies. In just the same way, man who manifests many names, and is charged with many duties, and afflicted with many enemies, invokes many of the names in his prayers and supplications, like Muhammadan the Arabian, peace and blessings be upon him. The cause of pride of mankind, and truly the most perfect man, supplicated with 1,001 names in his prayer, Jevshen el-Kabir. It is due to this mystery that the surah
قُلْ أَعُوذُ بِرَبِّ النَّاسِ مَلِكِ النَّاسِ إِلَهِ النَّاسِ مِنْ شَرِّ الْوَسْوَاسِ الْخَنَّاسِ.
Say, I seek refuge with the sustainer and cherisher of men, the sovereign of men, the Allah of men, from the evil of the whispering, elusive tempter. Commands that we take refuge with Allah through 3 titles and
Bismillahir Rahmanir Rahim.
In the name of Allah, the Merciful, the Compassionate. Show second branch. This explains 2 mysteries which comprise the keys to many further mysteries. First mystery. Why do the saints differ greatly in their visions and illuminations, although they are unanimous on the principles of belief? Why are their illuminations, which are at the degree of witnessing, sometimes opposed to reality and contrary to the truth? And why, in their ideas, which they consider to be the truth, establishing them through decisive proofs, do thinkers and scholars see and show reality in a way that contradicts one another? Why does one truth take on numerous colours? Second mystery. Why did the early prophets leave some of the pillars of belief, like bodily resurrection, in brief form, and not explain them in detail like the Qur'an, so that in the future some of their communities went as far as denying some of those concise pillars? Also, why did some of the saints only advance in the affirmation of divine unity, and although they even progressed as far as the degree of absolute certainty in divine unity, some of the pillars of belief appear in their paths very little and in summary form. And as a result, those who followed them in the future did not give the necessary importance to the pillars of belief, and some of them even fell into error. Since true perfection is found through the unfolding of all the pillars of belief, why did some of the mystics advance significantly in them, while some remained very backward, whereas Allah's most noble messenger, peace and blessings be upon him, who manifested all the divine names at their maximum degree, and was the chief of all the prophets, and the all-wise Qur'an, which is the luminous chief of all the sacred scriptures, described in detail all the pillars of belief, clearly, and in a most serious manner and deliberate way. Because in reality, the most true and complete perfection is thus. Yes, the wisdom in these mysteries is this. For sure, man is the place of manifestation of all the names. But since his power is slight, his will partial, his abilities various, and desires different, he searches for reality among thousands of veils and barriers. So in uncovering reality and witnessing the truth, barriers intervene. Some people cannot bypass the barriers. Their abilities are all different. The abilities of some cannot support the unfolding of some of the truths of belief. Moreover, the colours of the name's manifestations vary according to the place they are manifested. They become all different. Some people who manifest them cannot be the means to the complete manifestation of a name. Also, the manifestation of the names takes on different forms in respect of universality, particularity, shadow, or originality. Some capacities cannot transcend particularity, and some cannot emerge from the shadow. In some capacities, sometimes one name is predominant, and it carries out its word and rules in that capacity. Now we shall make a few indications to this profound mystery and this extensive wisdom, with an enigmatical, comprehensive, true, but somewhat complex comparison. For example, let us suppose an adorned flower, a living droplet enamoured of the moon, and a translucent atom which looks to the sun. Each of these possesses consciousness and some perfection, and each has a yearning for that perfection. Together with indicating many truths, these three things also allude to the spiritual voyaging of the soul, the mind, and the heart. They also correspond to three levels of those who investigate reality. Footnote: there are also three groups in each level. The three things given as examples in comparison look to these three groups which are in each level. Indeed, they look to those 9 groups, not to the 3 levels. The first indicates those who follow the path of intellectual thought, those who follow the path of sainthood, and those who follow the path of prophethood. The second corresponds to those who approach reality by striving for perfection through bodily systems, and those who approach it by striving with the mind and refining the soul, and those who approach it through belief, submission, and purifying the heart. The third is the comparison of those who do not give up egotism, are plunged in works, and approach reality through deduction and reasoning only, and of those who search for reality through knowledge and science, reason and learning, and those who approach reality swiftly through belief in the Qur'an, poverty and worship. These comparisons point to the wisdom in the differences between the 3 groups, whose capacities are also different. Thus, under the titles of flower, droplet and atom, we shall show by means of a comparison the mystery and extensive wisdom in the progress of the three groups. For example, through its Creator's permission and at His command, the sun has three sorts of manifestation, reflection and radiance. One is in its reflection on flowers, one its reflection on the moon and the planets, and one its reflection on shining objects like glass and water. The first is in three ways. One is a universal and general manifestation and reflection whereby its radiance encompasses all flowers at once. Another is a special manifestation whereby it has a special reflection for each species. Another is a particular manifestation whereby its effulgence is in accordance with the individuality of each flower. This comparison of ours is in conformity with this statement, that the adorned colours of the flowers arises from the changing reflections of the 7 colours in the sun's light. According to this, flowers too are sorts of mirrors to the sun. The second is the light and effulgence which, with the all-wise Creator's permission, the sun gives to the moon and planets. Having received this extensive universal light and effulgence, the moon, whose light is like a shadow of that light, profits from the sun in a universal fashion. Then its radiance and effulgence shines in a particular way on the seas and air and shining earth, and partially on the bubbles on the sea, and the translucent particles of the earth, and the molecules of the air. The third is through the divine command, a reflection of the sun, which, making the air and the surface of the seas into mirrors, is pure, universal, and without shadow. Then the sun gives to each of the bubbles on the sea, the droplets of water, molecules of air, and snowflakes, a particular reflection and tiny image of itself. Thus, in the 3 forms mentioned above, the sun bestows an effulgence and favour on every flower, the moon, and all droplets and atoms, and these in turn are each in 2 ways. The first way is direct and without barrier or veil. This way represents the way of prophethood. The second way, in this barriers intervene. The capacities of the mirrors and places of manifestation add colour to the sun's manifestations. This way represents the way of sainthood. Thus, on the first way, flower, droplet, and atom can each say, "I am a mirror to the sun of all the world." But on the second way, they cannot say that. They can rather say, "I am the mirror to my own sun, or the mirror to the sun which is manifested in my species." For that is the manner in which they know the sun. They cannot see a sun which looks to the whole world. The sun of that individual, or species, or genus appears to it within narrow confines and under limiting restrictions. And it cannot ascribe to that restricted sun the works of the unrestricted, unconfined, absolute sun. For within those narrow restrictions and limited confines, it cannot attribute to the sun, with a certain witnessing of the heart, its majestic works, like furnishing the whole face of the earth with light and heat, stirring all plants and animals into life, and making the planets revolve around it. Indeed, even if those 3 things, which we suppose to have consciousness, ascribe those wondrous works to the sun, which they see under those restrictions, they can only do so with the mind and through belief, and through submitting to the fact that that restricted thing is absolute. Whereas these judgments of flower, droplet, and atom, which we suppose to possess reason like a human being, that is, their ascribing those mighty works to the sun, is through the mind and reason. It is not through illumination. Indeed, Sometimes their judgments concerning belief clash with their illuminations about the cosmos. They can only believe them with great difficulty. Now, the three of us must enter into this comparison, which is narrow for reality, but in some of the corners of which the members of reality are to be seen, and which is mixed with reality. The three of us shall suppose ourselves to be flower, droplet, and atom. For the consciousness which we suppose them to have inefficient, we must add our reason to theirs. That is to say, just as they receive effulgence from their physical sun, we too shall receive effulgence from our immaterial sun, and must understand it. And so, my friend, who has not forgotten the world, is preoccupied with materiality, and whose soul is dense. You be flower. Flower takes on a colour dissolved from the sun's light, and it mixes the sun's image in with that colour, and clothes itself in an adorned form, for your capacity resembles it as well. Then let this philosopher, who has studied secular science and is plunged in causes like the old said to be droplet, which is enamoured of the moon, for the moon affords him the shadow of light it has received from the sun, and it gives a light to the pupil of his eye. Droplet too shines with the light, but he can only see the moon with it. He cannot see the sun. Rather, he can only see it through his belief. Then let this poor man be atom, who knows everything to be directly from Almighty Allah, and considers causes to be a veil. He is such an atom that knows himself to be poor in his own self. He has nothing on which to depend so as to rely on himself like flower. He possesses no colour that he should appear through it, and he does not recognize other things that he should turn towards them. He has a sheer purity by which he holds the sun's image directly in the pupil of his eye. Now, since we have taken the place of these three things, we must consider ourselves. What do we have? What must we do? Thus we look and see that through his favours, a most munificent one is adorning, illuminating and nurturing us. And man worships one who bestows favours on him. He wants to be close to one worthy of being worshipped, and desires to see him. In which case, in accordance with our capacities, each of us journeys through the attraction of that love. You who is like flower, you are going, but go as flower. See, you have gone, you have advanced and advanced till you have reached a universal degree, as though you have become like all flowers. But flower is a dense mirror. It dissolves and refracts the 7 colours in light. It conceals the sun's reflection. You will not be successful in seeing the face of the sun which you love, for the colours and characteristics which are restricted disperse it, draw a veil over it and obscure it. In this situation, you cannot be saved from the separation which occurs with the interposing of barriers. However, you can be saved on one condition, which is that you raise your head, which is sunk in love of your own soul, and withdraw your gaze, which glories and takes pleasure in its own merits, and cast it at the face of the sun in the sky. But on condition you turn your face looking down to the earth to gain your livelihood, up to the sun, for you are its mirror. Your duty is to act as a mirror to it. Whether you know it or not, your sustenance will anyway come from the earth, the door to the treasury of mercy. Yes, a flower is a minuscule mirror of the sun, and the sun too is merely a drop-like flash manifesting in the seas of the skies the name of light of the pre-eternal sun. O heart of man, understand from this of what sort of a sun you are the mirror. After fulfilling this condition, you will find your perfection But just as an actual reality, you cannot see the sun in that way, so you cannot understand this truth naked. The colours of your attributes give it a colour, and your cloudy telescope imposes a form on it, and your limited capacity restricts it. Now, wise philosopher, who has entered into droplet, you have advanced as far as the moon with the telescope of your droplet of thought, and by the stairway of philosophy you have entered the moon. Look, of itself the moon is dense and dark. It has neither light nor life. Your endeavour has all been in vain, and your knowledge has proved to be profitless. You can only be saved from the darkness of despair, the desolation of loneliness, the pestering of evil spirits, and the horrors of that bleakness through these conditions: that you give up the night of nature and turn to the sun of reality, and you believe with complete certainty that the light of this night are the shadows of the lights of the daytime sun. After fulfilling these conditions, you will find your perfection. You will find the majestic sun in place of the poor and darksome moon. But like your previous friend, you will not be able to see the sun clearly. You will see it behind the veils with which your reason and your philosophy are familiar and conversant, and behind the screens woven by science and learning, and within a colour conferred by your capacity. And now our atom-like third friend, who is both poor and colourless. He swiftly evaporates in the sun's heat, abandons his egotism, mounts the steam, and rises into the air. The dense matter within him takes fire with the flame of love and is transformed into light and radiance. He adheres to a ray proceeding from the manifestations of that light and draws close to it. O you who resembles atom, since you act as a direct mirror to the sun, at whatever degree you are, you will find an opening, a window looking purely at the sun itself in a fashion that affords absolute certainty. And you will experience no difficulty in attributing to the sun its wondrous works. Without hesitation, you will be able to ascribe to it the majestic attributes of which it is worthy. Nothing will be able to take you by the hand and make you forego ascribing to it the awesome works of its essential sovereignty. Neither the constriction of barriers, nor the limitations of your capacity, nor the smallness of mirrors will confuse you, nor impel you contrary to the truth. Because since you look at it purely, sincerely, and directly, you have understood that what appears in the places of manifestation and is observed in the mirrors is not the sun, but manifestations of it of a sort, and coloured reflections of it of a sort. For sure, those reflections are its titles, but they do not display all the works of its splendour. Thus, in this comparison, which is mixed with reality, perfection is reached by means of three ways which are all different, and which differ concerning the virtues of those perfections and the details of the degrees of witnessing. But in conclusion, and in submitting to the truth and confirming the reality, they are in agreement. Just as a man of the night, who has never seen the sun, and has only seen its shadow in the mirror of the moon, cannot squeeze into his mind the resplendent light and awesome gravity particular to the sun, but submits to those who have seen it and imitates them. Similarly, one who cannot attain to the maximum degrees of names like all-powerful and giver of life through the mercy of the legacy of Muhammad, peace and blessings be upon him, accepts the resurrection of the dead and great gathering imitatively, and declares it is not a matter that can be understood through the reason. For the reality of the resurrection and last judgment is the manifestation of the greatest name and of the supreme degree of certain other names. Those whose gaze cannot rise there are compelled to believe it by way of imitation, while those whose minds can enter there see the resurrection and last judgment as easily as day and night, and spring and winter, and accept it with an easy mind. Thus, it is due to this mystery that the Qur'an speaks of the resurrection and great gathering at the highest level and in the most perfect, detailed manner, and our Prophet, peace and blessings be upon him, who manifested the greatest name, taught it thus, and as required by the wisdom of guidance. The former prophets did not teach their communities, which were at a somewhat simple and primitive level, about the resurrection of the dead at the highest level and with the most extensive details. It is also due to this mystery that some of those who followed the path of sainthood did not see or could not demonstrate some of the truths of belief at the greatest degree. It is also due to this mystery that there are pronounced differences in the degrees of those who have knowledge of Allah. Numerous other mysteries like these unfold from this truth. Now, since both this comparison hints at the truth a little, and the truth is extremely extensive and profound, we also shall content ourselves. Third branch. Since the hadiths that speak of the signs of the end of time, the events at the end of time, and the merits and rewards of certain actions have not been well understood, some scholars who rely on their reason have pronounced some of them to be either weak or false, while some of the scholars whose belief was weak but whose egotism was strong have gone as far as denying them. For now we shall not attempt any detailed discussion, but shall only explain 12 principles. First principle. This is a matter which we have explained in the question and answer at the end of the 20th word. Its summary is this: religion is an examination, a test which distinguishes elevated spirits from base ones. It therefore speaks of matters that everyone shall see with their eyes in the future, in such a way that they remain neither altogether unknown nor self-evident, so that everyone would be compelled to confirm them. They open the door to the reason, but do not take the will from the hand. Because if a sign of the last day appeared completely, self-evidently, and everyone was compelled to affirm it, then a disposition like coal would remain equal to one like diamonds. The mystery of man's accountability and results of examination would go for nothing. It is because of this that there has been much dispute over many matters like that of the Mehdi and Sufyan. Also, the narrations differ greatly. They have become pronouncements which contradict one another. Second principle. There are various levels in the matters of Islam. If one requires certain proof, for another the prevailing opinion is sufficient. Others require merely assent and acceptance, and not to be rejected. In which case, secondary matters or particular events in time, which are not among the bases of belief, do not require certain compliance and definite proof, just not to be rejected and then to be submitted to, and not to be interfered with. Third principle. In the time of the companions of the Prophet, peace and blessings be upon him, most of the Jewish and Christian scholars entered Islam, and their former knowledge became Muslim along with them. Some of their former knowledge, which was contrary to the truth, was imagined to be part of Islam. Fourth principle. Some of the words of the narrations of hadith, or the meanings they deduced, were considered to be part of the texts of the hadiths themselves. However, since man cannot be free of fault, some of their deductions or words which were contrary to the truth were supposed to be hadiths and were pronounced to be weak. Fifth principle. according to the meaning of
إن في أمتي محدثون.
among my community are transmitters of hadiths. That is, meaning
ملهمون.
who are inspired. Some of the meanings which were obtained through the inspirations of scholars of related hadiths who followed the path of illumination and sainthood were supposed to be hadiths, whereas, due to certain obstructions, the inspiration of saints may be in error. Thus, some that are contrary to the truth may arise from this. Sixth principle. There are certain stories which, having become universally known, have become like proverbs. Their true meanings are not borne in mind. For whatever the purpose they were spread, that is what is considered. Thus, some stories and fables which have become well known among people in this way, Allah's noble messenger, peace and blessings be upon him, told in the form of comparisons and metaphors for the purpose of guidance. If there is any error in the true meanings of this sort of matters, it pertains to the customs and traditions of the people, and the way they have been passed among them. Seventh principle. There are many similes and parables that with the passage of time, or with passing from hand of learning to the hand of ignorance, have been supposed to be physical fact, and have become mistaken. For example, two angels of Allah in the world of similitudes, called the ox and the fish, who are among the supervisors of the animals of the land and the sea, are represented as an ox and fish, were imagined to be a huge ox and a physical fish. And the hadith was wrongly interpreted. And for example, one time in the presence of the Prophet, a deep rumbling was heard. Allah's messenger, peace and blessings be upon him, decreed, "That is the sound of a rock that has been rolling downhill for 70 years, and only now has hit the bottom of hell." Thus, someone hearing this hadith who does not know the truth may deviate into denial. But then, 20 minutes after the hadith was spoken, it was definitely established, for someone came and told Allah's messenger, peace and blessings be upon him, "The famous dissembler died 20 minutes ago." Allah's messenger, peace and blessings be upon him, had described most eloquently how the dissembler's 70-year lifetime of unbelief had been a continuous descent to the lowest of the low, as a stone of hell. Almighty Allah had made that rumbling heard at the moment of his death and given him a sign. Eighth principle. In this arena of trial and realm of examination, Almighty Allah, the absolutely wise one, conceals most important things in the midst of numerous others. And this is tied to many purposes, benefits, and instances of wisdom. For example, he has hidden the night of power in the whole of Ramadan, and the hour when prayers are answered in the whole of Friday, and well-accepted saints among the people generally, and the appointed hour in a person's lifetime, and the time of doomsday in the life of the world. For if the time of man's death had been specified, the first half of his life would be passed in absolute heedlessness, and the second in terror, like going step by step to the gallows. Whereas, for the balance between this world and the next to be preserved, and to remain perpetually between hope and fear, living and dying, have to be possible every moment. In which case, 20 years of uncertain life are preferable to 1,000 years of life that are specified. Thus, the last day is the appointed hour of the world, the macroanthropos. If the time had been specified, all the early and middle ages would have been plunged into absolute heedlessness, and the later centuries into terror. Just as in his personal life man is concerned with the continued existence of his home and village, so in his social life and as a member of mankind he is concerned with the continued existence of the earth and the world. The Qur'an says,
اقتربت الساعة.
The hour has drawn nigh. That is, doomsday is near. It is still not having come after 1,000 or this many years does not negate its closeness. Because doomsday is the appointed hour of the world, and in relation to the life of the world, 1 or 2,000 years are like 1 or 2 minutes in relation to a year. The hour of doomsday is not only the appointed hour of mankind, that it should be related to it and seen as distant. It is because of this that the absolutely wise one conceals doomsday in his knowledge among the 5 hidden things. It is due to the mystery of this vagueness that every age, including the age of bliss, the age of the prophet, people have been frightened of the end of the world. Some of them even said that the conditions had all but appeared. Thus, unfair people who do not know this truth say, "Why did the companions of the prophet, with their vigilant hearts and keen sight, who had been taught all the details of the hereafter, suppose a fact that would occur 1,400 years later to be close to their century, as though their ideas had deviated 1,000 years from the truth?" The answer: because through the effulgence of the prophet's conversation, the companions thought of the hereafter more than anyone, and knowing the transience of the world and understanding the divine wisdom in the hour of doomsday being vague, they assumed a position of always awaiting the world's appointed hour and worked seriously for the hereafter. Allah's noble messenger, peace and blessings be upon him, repeating, "Expect doomsday, wait for it," was a prophetic guidance arising from this wisdom. It was not a pronouncement or revelation concerning the specific time of its occurrence, and far from the truth. The cause is one thing and the wisdom is another. Thus, sayings of the prophet, peace and blessings be upon him, of this sort arise from the wisdom in certain things being indefinite. It is also due to this mystery that they expected the individuals who will come at the end of time, like the Mehdi and Sufyan, long beforehand, and even in the time of the generations succeeding the prophet, and hoped to live long enough to see them. Some of the saints even said that they had passed. Like the end of the world, divine wisdom requires that the times of these individuals are not specified either, because every age is in need of the Mahdi's meaning, for he strengthens morale and saves the people from despair. Every century has to have a share of this meaning, in order that people should not heedlessly follow evil, and the reins of the soul should not be left free in indifference. Every century, the fearsome individuals who come to lead strife must be shrunk from and feared. If they had been specified, the benefits of general guidance would have been lost. Now, the difference in the narrations about individuals like the Mehdi and their meaning is this. Those who expound hadiths applied the text of the hadiths to their own interpretations and commentaries. For example, since the centre of power at the time was Damascus or Medina, they imagined the events connected with the Mehdi and the Sufyan in places like Basra, Kufa and Syria, which were in the region of those centres, and expounded them accordingly. Moreover, they imagined the mighty works belonging to the collective identity or community, which those individuals represent, to be in their persons, and expounded them in that way, so that they ascribed a form to them, whereby, when those extraordinary individuals appear, everyone will recognize them. However, as we said, this world is the arena of trial. The door is opened to the reason, but the will is not taken from the hand. So when those individuals, and even the terrible Dajjal, appear, many people and himself will not know to start with that he is the Dajjal. Those individuals of the end of time will be known through the insight and light of belief. It is narrated in a hadith about the Dajjal, who is one of the signs of the end of time. His first day is like a year, his second like a month, his third day like a week, and his fourth day like other days. When he appears, the world will hear. He will travel the world in 40 days. Some unfair people have said about this narration that it is impossible. Allah forbid. And have gone as far as denying and declaring it null, whereas
لا يعلم الغيب إلا الله.
And the knowledge of it is with Allah. The reality of it must be this. It indicates the appearance of an individual from the north, who will come to lead a great current issuing forth from the godless ideas of naturalism in the north, where the world of unbelief is at its densest, and who will be an atheist. There is an instance of wisdom in this, for in the latitudes close to the North Pole, the whole year is one day and one night. There are 6 months of night and 6 months of day. One day of the Dajjal is a year, alludes to his appearance close to those latitudes. What is meant from his second day is a month, is that passing in this direction from the north, it sometimes happens that for a month in the summer the sun does not set. This suggests that the Dajjal will emerge in the north and invade southwards towards the civilized world. By attributing the day to the Dajjal, it points to this. He comes further in this direction, and the sun does not set for a week, and so it continues until there are 3 hours between its rising and setting. While being held as a prisoner of war in Russia, I was in such a place. Close to us was a place where the sun did not set for a week. They used to go there to watch it. As for the part when the Dajjal appears, all the world will hear it. The telegraph and radio have solved this. As for his travelling the world in 40 days, the railway and aeroplane, which are his mounts, have solved. Deniers who formerly considered these two statements to be impossible now see them as commonplace. Since in another treatise I have written in some detail about Gog and Magog and the barrier, which are among the signs of the end of the world, I refer readers to those, and here only say this. There are narrations stating that the tribes known as the Manchurians and Mongols, who threw human society into chaos and were the cause of the building of the Great Wall of China, will again overturn human civilization close to doomsday with an idea like anarchy. Some atheists say, where are the tribes that perform these extraordinary acts and that will perform them? The answer? A calamity like locusts appears in one season in enormous numbers. Then, on the change of the seasons, those numerous tribes which disrupt the country consign their reality to a few limited individuals. Then, when the time comes, at the divine command, great numbers appear from those limited individuals and embark on the same corruption, as though the reality of their national identity is fined down but not destroyed, and when the time arrives it re-emerges in just the same way. Those same tribes which overturned the world at one time will, when the time comes again, overturn human civilization with divine permission. But what impels them will be in a different form.
لا يعلم الغيب إلا الله.
Ninth principle. The results of some of the questions of belief look to this restricted and narrow world, while others look to the world of the hereafter, which is broad and absolute, in order to give the appropriate effect of either encouraging or restraining. Some hadiths about the merits and rewards of actions are in an eloquent style, and some unthinking people have supposed them to be exaggerated. However, since they are all pure truth and reality, there is no exaggeration or overstatement in them. For instance, there is this hadith which has worried the heads of the unfair more than any. Its meaning is,
لو وزنت الدنيا عند الله جناح بعوضة ما شرب الكافر منها جرعة ما.
if the world had as much value as a fly's wing for Almighty Allah, the unbelievers would not have had so much as a mouthful of water from it. The reality of it is this: the phrase
عند الله
for Almighty Allah refers to the eternal realm. Yes, since a light from the eternal realm to the extent of a fly's wing is everlasting, it is greater than a temporary light that fills the face of the earth. That means it is not to say that the huge world is equal to a fly's wing, but that everyone's private world which is situated within their short lives is not equal to an everlasting divine effulgence and bounty to the extent of a fly's wing from the eternal realm. Furthermore, the world has two faces, indeed, three faces. One is the mirror to Almighty Allah's names, another looks to the hereafter and its arable field, and the third looks to transience and non-existence. This is the world of the people of misguidance, which is not in accordance with the things that please Allah that we know. That is to say, it infers not that the vast world, which is the mirror to the most beautiful names, consists of missives of the eternally besought one, and is the tillage of the hereafter, but that the world of those who worship the world, which is opposed to the hereafter, and is the source of all wrongs and spring of calamities, is not worth one everlasting particle which will be given to the believers in the hereafter. Thus, how can the way it is understood by the unfair atheists be compared with this most true and serious truth? What has the meaning which those atheists suppose to be most exaggerated and overstated to do with this? And for example, others which the unfair atheists suppose to be exaggeration and even impossible overstatement are narrations about the rewards for actions and merits of some of the Qur'an surahs. For example, there are narrations that the merit of Surah Al-Fatiha is equal to that of the Qur'an, and the Surah Al-Ikhlas equals a third of the Qur'an, Surah Al-Zilzal a quarter, Surah Al-Kafirun a quarter, Surah Yasin 10 times the Qur'an. Unjust and unthinking people have said that these are impossible, because Surah Yasin and the other meritorious surahs are within the Qur'an, which makes it meaningless. The answer: the reality is this: for each of the all-wise Qur'an's letters is a merit. Each is a good deed. Out of divine grace, the merits of those letters sprout and yields sometimes 10, sometimes 70, and sometimes 700 merits. And the letters of Ayat al-Kursi, sometimes they yield 1,500, like the letters of Surah Al-Ikhlas, and sometimes 10,000, like verses recited on Layla al-Barara, and those that coincide with other acceptable times. And sometimes they yield 30,000, like verses recited on the night of power, which are like poppy seeds in their multiplicity. The indication that that night is the equivalent to 1,000 months makes it understood that on that night one letter has 30,000 merits. For example, let us suppose there is a field planted with maize, 1,000 plants of it. If some seeds produce 7 shoots, and from each shoot 1,000 grains, then a single seed becomes the equivalent of 2/3 of the whole field. For example, if one seed produces 10 shoots, and each yields 200 grains, then a single seed is the equivalent of twice the original field. You can make further analogies in the same way. Now, let us imagine the all-wise Qur'an to be a luminous, sacred, heavenly field. Each of its letters, together with its original merit, is like a seed. Their shoots will not be taken into consideration. They may be compared with the surahs and verses about which are narrations concerning their merits, like Yasin, Ikhlas, Fatiha, Kafirun, Zilzal. For example, the Qur'an has 300,620 letters, and Surah Al-Ikhlas, together with Bismillah, 69. 3 times 69 is 207 letters. Thus, if Surah Yasin's letters are reckoned and compared with all the letters of the all-wise Qur'an, and then multiplied 10 times, it produces the following result. Each letter of Surah Yasin has close on 500 merits. That is, that many good deeds may be reckoned. And so, if you apply the others to this, you will understand what a subtle, fine, true, and unexaggerated truth it is. 10th principle. Like with most of the other sorts of creatures, among mankind are certain individuals who are extraordinary by virtue of their acts and deeds. If those individuals have advanced in good deeds, they have been the cause of pride of mankind. Otherwise, they have been the cause of their shame. Also, they are hidden. It is as though each becomes a collective identity, an imaginary goal. Other individuals try to emulate them, and it is possible, that means being absolute and indefinite, it is possible for such a perfect, extraordinary person to be present everywhere. In regard to this indefiniteness, according to logic, his universality may be posited in the form of a possible proposition. That is, it is possible for all acts to produce the following result. For example, whoever performs 2 rakats of prayers at such and such a time has performed the equivalent of the Hajj. It is thus the truth that at certain times 2 rakats of prayer may be the equivalent of a Hajj. Due to its universality, this meaning may apply to all prayers of 2 rakats. That means what narrations of this sort refer to is not in fact continuous and universal, because since there are conditions of acceptance, it disallows it being continuous and universal. It is either in fact temporary and absolute, or possible and universal. That is to say, the universality in this sort of hadith is in regard to possibility. For example, backbiting is like murder. This means that someone who indulges in backbiting is more harmful than deadly poison, like a killer. And for example, a good word is a deed so good it is like freeing a slave. Here, in order to encourage and restrain, it points out the possibility of that indefinite, perfect individual being present everywhere in absolute form, as though it is actually the case, thus arousing eagerness for good and distrust for evil. Furthermore, the things of the eternal world cannot be measured on the scale of this world. The greatest thing here is not equal to the least thing there, because the merits of actions look to that world. Our worldly view is narrow for them. We cannot fit them into our minds. For example,
من قرأ هذا أعطي له مثل ثواب موسى وهارون.
Whoever reads this is given the reward of Moses and Aaron. That is to say,
الحمد لله رب السماوات ورب الأراضين رب العالمين وله الكبرياء في السماوات والأرض وهو العزيز الحكيم. الحمد لله رب السماوات ورب الأراضين رب العالمين وله العظمة في السماوات والأرض وهو العزيز الحكيم. وله الملك رب السماوات وهو العزيز الحكيم.
All praise be to Allah, sustainer of the heavens and sustainer of the earth, sustainer of all the worlds. His is the might in the heavens and the earth, and He is the mighty, the wise. All praise be to Allah, sustainer of the heavens and sustainer of the earths, sustainer of all the worlds, and His is the sublimity in the heavens and the earth, and He is the mighty, the wise. And His is the dominion, sustainer of the heavens, and He is the mighty, the wise. What has attracted the attention of the unfair and unthinking is narrations like these. The reality of the matter is this: with our narrow mind and short views in this world, we know how much we imagine the rewards of Moses and Aaron, peace be upon them, to be. The reward the absolutely compassionate one will give to one of his infinitely needy servants in the world of eternity and everlasting happiness, in return for a single invocation, may be equal to the reward of those two, but equal to the rewards as we conceive them and surmise them to be. For example, there is a primitive, uncouth man who has never seen the king and does not know the majesty of his rule. He imagines a lord in the village, and with his limited ideas, thinks of the king as a more exalted version of the Lord. Long ago, with us even, there was a simple-minded tribe who used to say, "Our Lord knows what the Sultan does when he cooks his bulgur soup on his stove in a saucepan." That is to say, they imagined the Sultan in such a narrow situation and so common a form that he cooked his own wheat soup. They supposed him to have the majesty of a captain. Now, if someone was to say to one of the tribe, "If you do this work for me today, I'll give you as much majesty as you think the Sultan has, and give you a rank as high as a captain," to say that is right because of the majesty of kingship, what enters the narrow bounds of his ideas is only the majesty of a captain. Thus, with our worldly views and narrow minds, we cannot think as much as that primitive man of the true rewards which look to the hereafter. It is not the equivalent of the true rewards of Moses and Aaron, peace be upon them, for according to the rule of similes and comparisons, the unknown is compared to the known. The true reward, which is unknown, for an invocation of one of Allah's believing servants, is compared with the rewards that we know and surmise. Moreover, the surface of the sea and the heart of a droplet are equal when it comes to holding the complete reflection of the sun. The difference is only in quality. The nature of the reward reflected in the mirrors of the ocean-like spirits of Moses and Aaron, peace be upon them, is exactly the same in nature as the reward that a believing servant, who is like a droplet, receives from a Quranic verse. They are the same in nature and quantity, while their quality is dependent on capacity. Also, it sometimes happens that a single word, a single glorification, opens a treasury of happiness that was not opened with 60 years of service. That is to say, it sometimes happens that a single verse may be as beneficial as the Qur'an. Also, the divine effulgence which Allah's noble messenger, peace and blessings be upon him, who manifested the greatest name, received from a single verse, may have been as much as all the effulgence one of the other prophets received. And it would not be contrary to the truth if it is said that a believer who, through the legacy of prophethood, manifests the shadow of the greatest name, receives in accordance with his own capacity and in regard to quantity a reward as great as a prophet's effulgence. Furthermore, reward and merit are from the world of light, and one world from that world may be contained in a speck. Just as the heavens and all its stars may appear in a tiny fragment of glass, so luminous reward and merit like the heavens may be situated in an invocation or verse which acquires transparency through pure intention. Conclusion. O unfair, unthinking, self-centered, cavilling man, whose belief is weak and philosophy strong, consider these 10 principles, then do not make the pretext a narration you thought was contrary to the truth and definitely opposed to reality, and point the finger of objection at hadiths, thus casting aspersions on the noble messenger's, peace and blessings be upon him's, sinlessness. But firstly, these 10 principles and what they entail will make you forego denial. They say, if there is any real fault, it is ours. It may not be referred to the hadiths. They say too, if the fault is not real, it springs from your misunderstanding. In short, if one embarks on denial and rejection, one first has to deny these 10 principles and show them to be false. Now, if you are fair, after pondering over these 10 principles with due attention, do not attempt to deny a hadith your reason considers contrary to the truth. Say, there is either an explanation or an interpretation or
Eleventh principle. Just as the Qur'an has obscure verses which are in need of interpretation, or else require absolute submission, hadiths also contain difficulties like the obscurities of the Qur'an. They are sometimes in need of extremely careful expounding and interpretation. The above examples may be sufficient for you. Yes, someone who is awake interprets the dream of another who is sleeping, and sometimes one who is sleeping hears the words spoken by those near him who are awake, but gives them a meaning and interprets them in a way that applies to his own world of sleep. O man stupefied by the sleep of heedlessness and philosophy! Do not deny in your dream what one saw who manifested the meaning of
ما زاغ البصر وما طغى.
His eye never wavered, nor did it swerve, and
تنام عيني ولا ينام قلبي.
my eye sleeps, but my heart sleeps not. And who was truly awake and aware. Interpret it. Yes, if a mosquito bites someone who is asleep, he sometimes dreams that he has received terrible wounds in war, and this has a reality in sleep. If he was to be questioned, he would say, "Truly, I have been wounded. Guns and rifles were fired at me." Those sitting by him laugh at his anguish in sleep. Thus, the sleep-stained view of heedlessness and philosophical thought certainly cannot be the criterion for the truths of prophethood. The 12th principle. Since prophethood, the affirmation of divine unity, and belief all look to unity, the hereafter, and divinity, they see truth and reality in accordance with those, while philosophers and scientists look to multiplicity, causes, and nature, and see in accordance with them. Their points of view are extremely distant from one another. The greatest aim of the people of philosophy is so small and insignificant as to be imperceptible among the aims of the scholars of religion and theology. It is because of this that scientists have advanced greatly in detailed explanation of the nature of beings and their minutest states. But they are so far behind the exalted divine sciences and sciences concerned with the hereafter, which are true wisdom and knowledge, that they are more backward than a simple believer. Those who do not understand this mystery suppose the investigative scholars of Islam to be relatively backward to the philosophers. But how can those whose minds see no further than their eyes and are submerged in multiplicity reach those who follow elevated sacred aims through the legacy of prophethood? Furthermore, when something is considered from 2 points of view, it shows 2 different truths, and both of them may be the truth. No certain fact of science can touch the sacred truths of the Qur'an. The shorthand of science cannot reach up to its pure sublimity. We shall mention an example to illustrate this. For example, if the globe of the earth is considered from the point of view of the people of science, its reality is this: as a middle-sized planet, it revolves around the sun amid countless stars. It is a small creature in relation to the stars. But, as explained in the 15th word, if it is considered from the point of view of the people of the Qur'an, its reality is this: since man, the fruit of the world, is a most comprehensive, most wondrous, most impotent, most weak, and most subtle miracle of divine power, the earth, his cradle and dwelling place, is, in regard to meaning and art, the universe's heart and centre. Despite its smallness and lowliness in relation to the heavens, it is the display and exhibition of all the miracles of divine art, the place of reflection and point of focus of the manifestations of all the divine names, the place of display and reflection of infinite dominical activity, the means and market of boundless divine creativity, and especially the munificent creation of the numerous species of plants and small animals, and the place in small measure of samples of the creatures of the broad worlds of the hereafter. It is a rapidly working loom, weaving everlasting textiles, the swiftly changing place producing views for eternal panoramas, and the narrow and temporary arable field, and seedbed producing at speed the seeds for everlasting gardens. It is because of this vastness of meaning and importance of art of the earth that the all-wise Qur'an holds it like a tiny fruit of the vast tree of the heavens, equal to all the heavens, like holding a tiny heart equivalent to a huge body. It places it in one pan of a scales and places all the heavens in the other, and repeatedly says,
Rabbus semavati vel ardu,
Sustainer of the heavens and the earth. Compare other matters with this, and understand that the soulless, dim truths of philosophy cannot clash with the brilliant, living truths of the Qur'an. Since the point of view is different, they appear differently. Fourth branch.
ألم تر أن الله يسجد له من في السماوات ومن في الأرض والشمس والقمر والنجوم والجبال والشجر والدواب وكثير من الناس وكثير حق عليه العذاب ومن يهن الله فما له من مكرم إن الله يفعل ما يشاء.
Are you not aware that before Allah prostrate themselves all that are in the heavens and all that are on earth, the sun and the moon, and the stars, and the mountains, and the trees, and the beasts, and a great number among mankind? But a great number are such as are fit for punishment, and such as Allah shall disgrace. None can raise to honour, for verily Allah does what He wills. We shall point out only a single jewel from the treasure of this extensive and sublime verse. It is as follows. The all-wise Qur'an states clearly that everything from the heavens to the earth, from the stars to flies, from angels to fishes, and from planets to particles, prostrates, worships, praises, and glorifies Almighty Allah. But their worship varies according to their capacities and the divine names that they manifest. It is all different. We shall explain one of the varieties of their worship with a comparison. For example,
وَلِلَّهِ الْمَثَلُ الْأَعْلَى,
and Allah's is the highest similitude. When a mighty Lord of all dominion builds a city or splendid palace, he employs 4 categories of workers. The first category are his slaves and bondsmen. This sort receive no wage or remuneration, but for each item of work that they carry out, through their Lord's command. They experience a subtle pleasure and pleasant eagerness. Whatever they utter by way of praise and description of their Lord increases their pleasure and eagerness. Knowing their connection with their Holy Lord to be a great honour, they content themselves with that. Also, they find pleasure from looking to their work with the view of their Lord, and for His sake and in His name. They are not in need of any wage, rank or remuneration. The second category are ordinary servants. They do not know why they are working or that they are being employed by the glorious Lord. He causes them to work through His own ideas and knowledge and gives them an appropriately small wage. These servants are unaware of what various and comprehensive aims and exalted matters result as a consequence of their work. Some of them even imagine that their work concerns themselves alone and has no aim besides their wage. The third category. The Lord of all dominion has some animals which He employs in various jobs in the construction of the city and palace. He only gives them fodder, but their working at tasks suitable for their abilities gives them pleasure. For if a potentiality or ability is realized in action and work, there is a breathing in and expansion, and this results in pleasure. The pleasure to be had from all activity stems from this. The wage and remuneration of this sort of servant, then, is only fodder and that pleasure. The fourth category are workers who know what they are doing, and why, and for whom they are working, and why the other workers are working, and what the purpose of the Lord of all dominion is, and why He is causing them to work. Workers of this category are therefore bosses and supervisors over the other workers. They receive remuneration that is graded according to their rank and degree. In exactly the same way, the sustainer of all the worlds, who is the all-glorious Lord of the heavens and the earth, and the all-beauteous builder of this world and the hereafter, employs both angels and animals, and inanimate beings and plants, and human beings in the palace of this world, in this realm of causality. He employs them not out of need, for the Creator of everything is He, but for certain instances of wisdom, like the functioning of His might, sublimity, and dominicality. He causes them to worship, and has charged these four categories with different duties of worship. The first category is the angels, who are represented in the comparison by the slaves. For the angels there is no endeavour and progress. They all have their fixed station and determined rank, and receive a particular pleasure from the work itself, and an emanation from their worship. That is to say, the reward of these servants is found within their duties. Just as man is nourished by air, water, light and food, and receive pleasure from them, so are the angels nourished by the varieties of remembrance, glorification, praise, worship, knowledge and love of Allah, and take pleasure in them. For since they are created out of light, light is sufficient for their sustenance. Fragrant scents even, which are close to light, are a sort of nourishment for them, which they enjoy. Indeed, good spirits take pleasure in sweet smells. Furthermore, there is in the tasks that the angels perform at the command of the one whom they worship, in the work they accomplish for His sake, in the service they discharge in His name, in the supervision they execute through His favour, in the honour they gain through their connection with Him, in the immaculateness they attain through studying His dominion in both its outer face and its face which looks to Him, and in the ease they find through beholding the manifestations of His beauty and glory. Such sublime bliss that the human mind cannot comprehend it, and one who is not an angel cannot perceive it. One sort of angels are worshippers, and the worship of another sort is in work. of the angels of the earth, the sort that are workers, have a kind of human occupation, if one may say so. One type are like shepherds, and another like farmers. That is to say, the face of the earth is like a general farm, and an appointed angel supervises all the species of the animals within it, through the command of the all-glorious Creator, and with his permission, for his sake, and through his power and strength. And for each species of animal there is a lesser angel, who is appointed to act as a special shepherd. The face of the earth is also a place of cultivation. The plants are all sown in it. There is an angel charged with supervising them in the name of Allah Almighty and through his power. And there are angels who are lesser than him, and who worship and glorify Allah by supervising particular species. The Archangel Michael, peace be upon him, who is one of the bearers of the throne of sustenance, is the most important overseer of these. The angels, who are in the position of shepherd and farmer, do not bear any resemblance to human beings, for their supervision is purely for the sake of Almighty Allah, and in his name, and through his power and command. Their supervision of animals consists only of beholding the manifestations of dominicality in the species where they are employed, studying the manifestations of power and mercy in it, making known to that species the divine commands by way of a sort of inspiration, and in some way ordering the voluntary actions of the species. Their supervision of the plants in the field of the earth in particular consists of representing the plant's glorification in the angelic tongue, proclaiming in the angelic tongue the salutations the plants offer to the all-glorious Creator through their lives, and employing the faculties given to the plants correctly, and directing them towards certain aims, and ordering them to some extent. These duties of the angels are meritorious actions of a sort by reason of the angel's faculty of will. Indeed, they are a kind of worship and adoration, but the angels have no real power of disposal, for on everything is a stamp peculiar to the Creator of all things. Another's hand cannot interfere in creation. That is to say, this sort of work of the angels forms their worship. It is not a custom like with human beings. The second category of workers in this palace of the universe are animals. Since animals also have an appetitive soul and faculty of will, their work is not purely for the sake of Allah. To some extent, they take a share for their souls. Therefore, since the glorious and munificent Lord of all dominion is all generous, he bestows a wage on them during their work so that their souls receive a share. For example, the all-wise Creator employs the famous nightingale, renowned for his love of the rose, for 5 aims. Footnote: since the nightingale speaks poetically, our discussion also becomes poetic for a bit. But it is not imaginary, it is the truth. First aim: it is the official employed to proclaim in the name of the animal species the intense relationship that exists between them and the plant species. Second aim: it is a dominical orator from among the animals, who are like guests of the all-merciful one, needy for sustenance, employed to acclaim the gifts sent by the all-generous provider, and to announce their joy. Third aim: it is to announce to everyone the welcome offered to plants, which are sent for the assistance of his fellow animals. Fourth aim: it is to announce over the blessed heads and to the beautiful faces of the plants the intense need of the animal species for them, which reaches the degree of love and passion. Fifth aim: it is to present with acute yearning at the court of mercy of the all-glorious and beauteous and munificent Lord of all dominion a most graceful glorification inspired by the truly delicate face of the rose. There are further meanings similar to these 5 aims, and they are the purpose of the deeds the nightingale performs for the sake of truth. All glory be unto him, and may he be exalted. The nightingale speaks in his own tongue, but we understand these meanings from his plaintive words. If he himself does not altogether know the meaning of his own song like the angels do, it does not impair our understanding. The saying, "One who listens understands better than one who speaks," is well known. Also, the nightingale does not show that he does not know these aims in detail, but this does not mean they do not exist. At least he informs you of them like a clock informs you of the time. What difference does it make if he does not know? It does not prevent you from knowing. However, the nightingale's small wage is the delight he experiences from gazing on the smiling, beautiful roses, and the pleasure he receives from conversing with them and pouring out his woes. That is to say, his sorrowful song is not a complaint arising from animal grief. It is thanks in return for the gifts of the Most Merciful. Compare the bee, the spider, the ant, creeping insects, the male animals that are the means of reproduction, and the nightingale of all small creatures. With the nightingale, the deeds of all of them have numerous aims. For them too, a particular pleasure, like a small wage, has been included in their duties. Through that pleasure, they serve important aims contained in the dominical art. Just as an ordinary seaman acts as helmsman on an imperial ship and receives a small wage, so do the animals employed in duties of glorification, each to the discussion on the nightingale. However, do not suppose this proclaiming and heralding and these songs of glorification are peculiar to the nightingale. In most species, there is a class similar to the nightingale that consists of a fine individual or individuals which represent the finest feelings of that species, with the finest glorification and finest poetry. The nightingales of flies and insects in particular are both numerous and various. Through their humming poetry, they make all animals with ears, from the largest to the smallest, hear their glorifications and give them pleasure. Some of them are nocturnal. These poetry-declaiming friends of all small animals are their sweet-voiced orators when all beings are plunged into the silence and tranquillity of the night. Each is a centre of a circle of silent recollection, an assembly in solitude, to which all the others listen, and, in a fashion, recollect and extol the all-glorious Creator in their own hearts. Another sort are diurnal. By day, in spring and summer, they proclaim the mercy of the Most Merciful and Compassionate, one to all animate beings from the pulpits of the trees with their ringing voices, subtle songs and poetic glorifications. It is as if, like the leader of a gathering for the recitation of Allah's names, induces the ecstasy of those participating. All the creatures listening start to praise the all-glorious Creator, each in its own special tongue, with a particular chant. That is to say, every sort of being, and even the stars, have a chief reciter and light-scattering nightingale. But the most excellent, the most noble, the most luminous, the most dazzling, the greatest and the most honourable nightingale, whose voice was the most ringing, whose attributes the most brilliant, whose recitation the most complete, whose thanks the most universal, whose essence was the most perfect, and whose form the most beautiful, who brought all the beings of the heavens and the earth in the garden of the universe to ecstasy and rapture through his subtle poetry, his sweet song, his exalted glorification, was the glorious nightingale of humankind, the nightingale of the Qur'an, Muhammad the Arabian.
عليه وعلى آله وأمثاله efdalus salati ve ecmelut teslimat.
Upon whom, and upon whose family, and those who resemble him, to be the best of blessings and peace. To conclude, the animals who serve in the palace of the universe conform with complete obedience to the creational commands and display perfectly in the name of Almighty Allah the aims included in their natures, the glorification and worship they perform by carrying out the duties related to their lives in this wonderful fashion through the power of Allah Almighty, are gifts and salutations which they present to the court of the all-glorious Creator, the bestower of life. The third category of workers are plants and inanimate creatures. Since they have no faculty of will, they receive no wage. Their work is purely for the sake of Allah, and in His name, on His account, and through His will, power and strength. However, it may be perceived from their growth and development that they receive a sort of pleasure from their duties of pollination and producing seeds and fruits, but they experience no pain at all. Due to their will, animals experience pain as well as pleasure. Since will does not enter into the work of plants and inanimate beings, their work is more perfect than that of animals who have will. Among those who possess will, the work of creatures like the bee, which are enlightened by revelation and inspiration, is more perfect than the work of those animals which rely on their faculty of will. All the species of plants in the field of the face of the earth pray and ask of the all-wise Creator through their tongues of disposition and potentiality, O our Sustainer, give us strength so that by raising the flag of our species in every part of the earth, we may proclaim the splendour of your dominicality and grant us prosperity so that we may worship you in every corner of the mosque of the earth, and bestow on us the power to spread and travel in order to exhibit through our particular tongue the embroideries of your most beautiful names and your wonderful antique arts. The all-wise Creator answers their silent prayer and bestows on the seeds of one species tiny wings made of hair. They fly away spreading everywhere. They cause the divine names to be read in the name of their species. Like the seeds of most thorned plants and some yellow flowers, He gives to some species beautiful flesh that is either necessary or pleasant for human beings. He causes man to serve them and plant them everywhere. To some, He gives covering a hard and indigestible bone, flesh that animals eat so that they disperse the seeds over a wide area. On some He bestows small claws that grip onto all who touch them. Moving on to other places, they raise the flag of the species and exhibit the antique art of the all-glorious Maker. And to some species, like to the bitter melon, He gives the force of a buckshot rifle, so that when the time is right, the small melons, which are its fruits, fall and fire out their seeds like shot to a distance of several metres, and sow them. They work so that the numerous tongues will glorify the all-glorious Creator and recite His beautiful names. You may think of other examples in the same way. The all-wise Creator, who is all-powerful and all-knowing, has created everything beautifully and with perfect order. He has fitted them out beautifully, turned their faces towards beautiful aims, employed them in beautiful duties, caused them to utter beautiful glorifications and to worship beautifully. O man, if indeed you are a human being, do not confuse nature, chance, futility and misguidance with these beautiful matters. Do not make them ugly. Do not act in an ugly fashion. Do not be ugly. The fourth category are human beings. Human beings, who are servants of a sort in the palace of the universe, resemble both angels and animals. They resemble angels in the universality of worship extensiveness of supervision, comprehensiveness of knowledge, and in being heralds of divine dominicality. However, man is more comprehensive in his worship, but since he has an appetitive soul. However, man is more comprehensive in his worship, but since he has an appetitive soul that is disposed towards evil, contrary to the angels, he is subject to progress and decline, which is of great importance. Also, since in his work man seeks pleasure for his soul and a share for himself, he resembles an animal. Since this is so, man receives two wages. The first is insignificant, animal and immediate. The second, angelic, universal and postponed. Now man's duty and his wages, and his progress and decline, have been discussed in part in all 33 of the words, and have been explained in greater detail in the 11th and 23rd words in particular. We shall therefore cut short the discussion here and close the door, and beseeching the most merciful to open to us the gates of his mercy, and seeking forgiveness for our faults and errors, we conclude here. Fifth branch. The fifth branch has 5 fruits. The first fruit: O my self-worshipping soul, O my world-worshipping friend, love is the cause of the universe's existence, and what binds it, and it is both the light of the universe and its life. Since man is the most comprehensive fruit of the universe, a love that will conquer the universe has been included in his heart, the seed of that fruit. Thus, only one possessing infinite perfection may be worthy of such an infinite love. O soul and O friend, 2 faculties through which one may perceive fear and love have been included in man's nature. This love and fear are bound to be turned towards either creatures or Creator. However, fear of creatures is a grievous affliction, while love for them is a calamitous tribulation. For you will fear people who will neither pity you nor accept your pleas for mercy. So fear is a grievous calamity. As for love, the one you love will either not recognize you or will depart without bidding you farewell, like your youth and property, or else he will despise you because of your love. Have you not noticed that in 99 out of 100 cases of metaphorical love, the lover complains about the beloved? For to love and idolize worldly beloveds with the inner heart, which is the mirror of the eternally besought one, oppresses the beloved, and he finds it disagreeable and rejects it. Because man's nature rejects and casts away things that are contrary to it and unworthy of it, physical loves are outside our discussion. That is to say, the things you love either will not recognize you, or they will scorn you, or they will not accompany you. They will part from you in spite of you. Since this is so, direct your fear and love to the one by whom your fear will become pleasurable abasement, and your love shadowless happiness. Yes, to fear the glorious Creator means finding a way to his compassionate mercy and taking refuge in it. Fear is a whip. It drives you into the embrace of his mercy. It is well known that a mother gently scares her infant, for example, and draws it to her breast. The fear is most pleasurable for the child because it drives him to her tender embrace, whereas the tenderness of all mothers is but a flash of divine mercy. That means there is a supreme pleasure in fear of Allah. If there is such pleasure in fear of Allah, it is clear what infinite pleasure there is to be found in the love of Allah. Moreover, one who fears Allah is saved from the calamitous and distressing fear of others. Also, because it is for Allah's sake, the love he has for creatures is not tinged with sorrow and separation. Indeed, man loves firstly himself, then his relations, then his nation, then living creatures, then the universe and the world. He is connected with all these spheres, he may receive pleasure at their pleasure and pain at their pain. However, since nothing is stable in this world of upheavals and revolutions, swift as the wind, man's wretched heart is constantly wounded. The things his hands cling on to tear at them as they depart, even severing them. He remains in perpetual distress, or else plunges into heedless drunkenness. Since it is thus, my soul, if you have sense, gather together all those loves and give them to their true owner. Be saved from those calamities. These infinite loves are particular to one possessing infinite perfection and beauty. When you give it to its true owner, you will be able to love everything without distress in His name and as His mirrors. That means this love should not be spent directly on the universe. Otherwise, while being a delicious bounty, it becomes a grievous affliction. There is another aspect besides, O soul, and it is the most important. You spend all your love on yourself. You make your own soul your object of worship and beloved. You sacrifice everything for your soul. Simply, you ascribe to it a sort of dominicality, whereas the cause of love is either perfection, because perfection is loved for itself, or it is benefit, or it is pleasure, or it is goodness, or causes like these. Now, O soul, in several of the words, we have proved decisively that your essential nature is needed out of fault, deficiency, poverty, and impotence, and like the relative degrees of darkness and obscurity shows the brightness of light with regard to opposites, you act as a mirror through them to the perfection, beauty, power, and mercy of the beauteous Creator. That means, O soul, that it is not love you should have for your own soul, but enmity, or you should pity it, or after it is at peace, have compassion on it. If you love your soul because it is the source of pleasure and benefit, and you are captivated by their delights, do not prefer the pleasure and benefit of the soul, which is a mere jot, to the infinite pleasure and benefits. Do not resemble a firefly, for it drowns all your friends and the things you love in the darkness of the desolation, and suffices with a tiny glimmer in itself. You should love a pre-eternal beloved, on whose gracious favours are dependent all the pleasures and benefits of your soul, together with all the benefits and bounties and creatures of the universe, with which you are connected, and from which you profit, and through whose happiness you are happy. So then, you may take pleasure at both your own happiness and their happiness, and receive an infinite pleasure from the love of the absolutely perfect one. Anyway, your intense love for yourself and your soul is love for the divine essence, which you misuse and spend on your own self. In which case, rend the egotism in your soul and show Him. All your loves dispersed through the universe are love given to you to spend on His names and attributes. You have used it wrongly, and you are suffering the penalty. For the penalty for an illicit, misspent love is merciless torment. For sure, one particle of the love of a pre-eternal beloved who, through the names of the most merciful and compassionate, has prepared a dwelling like paradise, adorned with houris for you, in which all your bodily desires will be gratified, and through others of His names has readied for you in that paradise everlasting favours that will satisfy all the longings of your spirit, heart, mind, and other subtle inner faculties, and in all of whose names are contained many treasuries of grace and munificence. One particle of His love may take the place of the whole universe, but the universe cannot take the place of even a particular manifestation of His love, in which case heed this pre-eternal decree, which that the pre-eternal beloved caused His own beloved to announce, and follow it.
إن كنتم تحبون الله فاتبعوني يحببكم الله.
Second fruit. O soul, worship is not the introduction to additional rewards, but the result of previous bounties. Yes, we have received our wage and are accordingly charged with the duties of service and worship. Because, O soul, since the all-glorious Creator, who clothed you in existence, which is pure good, has given you a stomach and appetite, through his name of Provider, he has placed before you all foods on a table of bounties. Then, since he has given you a life decked out with senses, life too requires sustenance like a stomach. All your senses, like eyes and ears, are like hands before which he has placed a table of bounties as broad as the earth. Then, because he has given you humanity, which requires many immaterial foods and bounties, he has laid out before that stomach of humanity, in so far as the hand of the mind can reach, an extensive table of bounties as broad as the worlds of both the inner and outer dimensions of things. Then, since he has given you Islam and belief, which require infinite bounties and are nourished through countless fruits of mercy and are supreme humanity, he has opened up before you a table of bounties, pleasure and happiness, which includes the sphere of contingency together with the sphere of his sacred names and attributes. Then, through giving you love, which is a light of belief, he has bestowed on you an endless table of bounties, happiness and pleasure. That is to say, with regard to your corporeality, you are an insignificant, weak, impotent, lowly, restricted, limited particular. But through his favour, you have as though risen from being an insignificant particular to being a universal, luminous whole. For by giving you life, he has raised you from the particularity to a sort of universality, and by giving you humanity to true universality, and by bestowing Islam on you to an exalted, luminous universality, and by giving you knowledge and love of him, he has elevated you to an all-encompassing light. O soul, you have received this wage, and you are charged with a pleasurable, bountiful, easy, and light duty of worship. But you are lazy in this too. If you perform it half-heartedly, it is as though the former wages are insufficient for you, and you are overbearingly wanting greater things. Also, you are complaining, "Why was my prayer not accepted?" But your right is not complaint, it is supplication. Through his pure grace and munificence, Almighty Allah bestows paradise and eternal happiness. So seek refuge in his mercy and munificence constantly. Trust in him and heed this decree.
قل بفضل الله وبرحمته فبذلك فليفرحوا هو خير مما يجمعون.
Say, in the bounty of Allah and his mercy, in that let them rejoice. That is better than the wealth they hoard. If you say, how can I respond to these countless universal bounties with my limited and partial thanks? The answer: with a universal intention and boundless belief. For example, a man enters a king's presence with a gift worth 5 kurush, and he sees that other gifts worth millions have arrived from acceptable people and have been lined up before there. It occurs to him, my present is nothing, what shall I do? Then he says suddenly, my Lord, I offer you all these valuable gifts in my name, for you are worthy of them. If I had the power, I would have given you gifts equal to them. Thus the king, who has need of nothing and accepts his subjects' gifts as a sign of their loyalty and respect, accepts that wretched man's universal intention and wish, and the worthiness of his elevated belief as though it was the greatest gift. In exactly the same way, while performing the 5 daily prayers, an impotent servant of Almighty Allah declares, Salutations be to Allah. That is, I offer you, on my own account, all the gifts of worship all creatures offer through their lives. If I had been able, I would have offered you as many salutations as them, for you are worthy of them, and worthy of more besides. Such an intention and belief comprise extensive universal thanks. The seeds and grains of plants are their intentions. And for example, the melon utters 1,000 intentions in its heart in the form of the nuclei of its seeds. O my Creator, I want to proclaim the embroideries of your most beautiful names in many places on the earth. Since Almighty Allah knows how future things will come about, He accepts their intention as actual worship. The rule, a believer's intention is better than his actions, alludes to this mystery. The wisdom in offering glorifications in also infinite numbers is understood from this mystery. For instance,
سبحانك وبحمدك عدد خلقك ورضاء نفسك وزينة عرشك ومداد كلماتك ونسبحك بجميع تسبيحات أنبيائك وأوليائك وملائكتك.
Glory and praise be unto you, to the number of your creatures, that may be as pleasing to you as the extent of your throne and the ink of your words. And we glorify you with all the glorifications of your prophets and saints and angels. Just as an officer presents all the duties of his soldiers to the king in his own name, so man who acts as an officer to other creatures, commands the animals and plants, has the capacity to be Allah's vicegerent over the beings of the earth, and in his own world considers himself to be representative, everyone declares,
إياك نعبد وإياك نستعين.
You alone do we worship, and from you alone do we seek help. He offers the worship and seeking of help of all creation to the all-glorious true object of worship in his own name. He also says,
اللهم صل على محمد بعدد ذرات الكائنات ومركباتها.
O Allah, grant blessings to Muhammad, to the number of the particles in existence and all their compounds. He offers benedictions for the Prophet, peace and blessings be upon him, in the name of everything, because everything is connected with a Mohammedan light. Thus you may understand the wisdom in the countless numbers mentioned in the glorifications and benedictions for the Prophet, peace and blessings be upon him. Third fruit, O soul, if, in a brief life, you want to do something that will profit you infinitely in the hereafter, and you want every moment of your life to be as beneficial as a lifetime, and if you want to transform your habitual actions into worship and your heedlessness into awareness of the divine presence, follow the illustrious practices of the Prophet, peace and blessings be upon him. For when you apply your actions to the rulings of the Sharia, it affords a sort of awareness of Allah's presence. It becomes worship of a sort, and yields many fruits for the hereafter. For example, you bought something. The moment you applied what is acceptable and required by the Sharia, that ordinary act of shopping acquired the value of worship. Recalling the injunctions of the Sharia calls to mind revelation, and by thinking of the lawgiver, you are turned towards Allah, and that makes you aware of His presence. That means, in applying the illustrious Sunnah to your actions, are advantages like making this fleeting life the means of gaining an everlasting life, which produces eternal fruits. Heed the decree.
فآمنوا بالله ورسوله النبي الأمي الذي يؤمن بالله وكلماته واتبعوه لعلكم تهتدون.
So believe in Allah and His Messenger, the unlettered Prophet, who believes in Allah and His Word. Follow him that you may be guided. Try to reflect comprehensively the effulgence and manifestation of all the most beautiful names, whose manifestations are diffused within the ordinance of the Sharia and illustrious Sunnah. Fourth fruit. O soul, do not look at the worldly, and especially the dissipated and the unbelievers, and be deceived by their superficial glitter and illicit pleasures. Do not imitate them. For even if you do imitate them, you will not be like them, and you will decline immeasurably. You cannot be an animal even, for the intellect in your head becomes an inauspicious tool which constantly beats you over the head. For example, there is a palace, and in one of its large apartments is a powerful electric lamp. Small electric lights which branch out from it and are attached to it have been divided among its small apartments.
Now someone touches the switch of the big light and turns it off. All the apartments are plunged into deep darkness and desolation.
Another palace has small electric lights in all its apartments which are not connected to the large light. If the owner of that latter palace presses the switch of the large electric light and turns it off, there may still be lights on in the other apartments, by which he can carry out his work, and which will not allow thieves to profit from the darkness. O soul, the first palace is a Muslim, and the Prophet Muhammad, peace and blessings be upon him, is the large electric light in his heart. If he forgets him, or I seek refuge with Allah from Satan the accursed, he expels him from his heart, he will accept none of the other prophets. Indeed, no place will remain in his spirit for any perfection. He will not even recognize his sustainer. All the apartments and subtle faculties in his nature will be plunged into darkness, and there will be a terrible destruction and desolation in his heart. How will he profit in the face of this destruction and desolation? Where will he find familiarity? What benefit will he secure which will repair the damage? However, Europeans resemble the second palace. Even if they cast out from their hearts the light of the Prophet Muhammad, peace and blessings be upon him, lights of a sort may remain, or they suppose they remain. They may continue to have a sort of belief in their Creator and in Moses and Jesus, peace be upon them, which allow them to attain good morals and character. O my evil commanding soul, if you say, I am not a European and I want to be an animal, how many times have I told you, you cannot be an animal, for there is intelligence in your head, and it strikes your face, eyes and head with the pains of the past and fears of the future, and beats you. It adds 1,000 pains to one pleasure, whereas animals receive pleasure without pain. So first pluck out your intelligence and throw it away. Then be an animal. You will also receive the chastening slap of
كالأنعام بل هم أضل.
Like cattle, nay, they are further astray. Fifth fruit. O my soul, as we have stated repeatedly, since man is the fruit of the tree of creation, he is a creation which, like a fruit, is the furthest and most comprehensive and looks to everything, and bears the seed of a heart which holds within it the aspects of unity of everything, and whose face looks to the multiplicity, transience, and the world. As for worship, it is a line of union which turns his face from transience to permanence, from creation to creator, from multiplicity to unity, and from the extremity to the source. Or it is a point of union between the source and the extremity. If a valuable conscious fruit, which will form a seed, looks to the living creatures beneath the tree, and relying on its beauty, throws itself into their hands, if being heedless it falls, it will fall to their hands and be smashed and will go for nothing like common fruit. But if the fruit finds its point of support, and it is able to think that by the seed within it holding the aspects of unity of the whole tree, it will be the means of the tree's continuance and the continued existence of the tree's reality. Then a single seed within that single fruit will manifest a perpetual universal truth within an everlasting life. In the same way, if man plunges into multiplicity, is drowned in the universe, and intoxicated by love of the world, is deceived by the smiles of ephemeral beings, and casts himself into their arms, he certainly falls into infinite loss. He falls into both transitoriness and ephemerality, and non-existence. In effect, he sentences himself to death. But if he listens with the ear of his heart to the lessons in belief from the tongue of the Qur'an, and raises his head and turns toward unity, he may rise through the ascension of worship to the throne of perfections. He may become an eternal man.
O my soul, since the reality is thus, and since you are a member of the nation of Abraham, peace be upon him, like Abraham say,
لا أحب الآفلين.
I do not love those that sit.
Turn your face to the eternal beloved and weep the following lines like me. The Persian verses to be included here have been included in the second station of the 17th word and have not been repeated here.